everyone, my name is Sinead. I'm a senior recruiter here with Engage People Recruitment, a specialist financial recruitment company. I'm joined here with Paul McClatchy, the director of Engage People.
Hey Sinead, how's it going?
How are you?
Yeah, great, thanks. So my background is obviously I've worked in the sector over the last number of years. I'll let you elaborate. I suppose we both experienced recruiters on the accountancy side.
Yeah, that's it. So we both work on the accountancy desk here at Engage People, and thanks very much for joining us today, Paul. I suppose I just wanted to chat through, the kind of the current market at the moment, what it might be like for job seekers out there, and then also what it's like for, I suppose, hiring managers as well. It's obviously been a very interesting year, and one that has seen huge changes to, I suppose, how we work, and we're yet to see, I suppose, how workforces might look going forward. How would you describe, I suppose, the current accountancy market?
There's been lots of changes this year. Look, I guess, we don't get too far ahead of ourselves, but we're probably slightly busier than maybe we would have expected. So we, as you know, with a very good start to the year, January and February were busy. March and April then really challenging. Just, a lot of companies weren't set up for remote working. There was people due to start jobs and in some cases they had to put a pause on start dates. But by and large, I think quarter three saw a bit of a bounce back, and quarter four, I would say it's primarily, most companies are sort of business as usual, albeit that some sectors aren't. I think that maybe there's slightly less movement to the junior end. I would say people are being replaced, rather than maybe a huge amount of growth. But definitely there's some sectors, and I think it's well known, pharma, tech, and what we've seen quite a few Irish companies are growing, so in addition to replacing leavers, they're adding to their teams. So we're reasonably healthy. And obviously there's recently been a vaccine announced. That may be another positive development. So fingers crossed.
Yeah, absolutely. And have you noticed a major difference between, I suppose, the first lockdown and then this lockdown in relation to recruitment?
So yeah, look, I think there has been. I think that period, for ourselves included, it was a big change. We were working from April to June. There was a lot of companies actually were hiring who sort of continue their process. But I think companies have a much clearer onboarding structure, and companies adjusted very quickly. I thought, I have to say, I think just within the accountancy world, there's a lot of software that people have been able to utilize, a lot of communication software. So I think by and large, companies maybe where they hadn't got that set up have implemented that. Certainly with the multinational clients, the way the world was moving towards, having sort of optional remote working. So it was maybe a case of implementing that. But it just appears to me like the start dates are very well organized. People get a welcome pack that obviously, sometimes includes a laptop, includes a phone. So I would have seen quite a difference now. Whereas, if companies need to hire, they will. Whereas I think a lot of companies maybe just pause things, just sat in their hands, for that initial period.
Yeah, I think so too. Like we've had a number of, I suppose, candidate start roles within this lockdown period, the last 3 weeks. And, the processes have been, I suppose, for most smooth. People are much better set up. They have the processes in place. They're used to working from home now. So look, it's a positive experience.
Yeah, and just to mention on the other point you made, I mean, it was interesting that quite a few of the people who were due to start in April, May, and jobs roles that were paused indefinitely to a degree, a lot of them came back and actually they were hired. If you think about it, back in August, September, there was a series of sort of positive outcomes.
I suppose, Paul, what are the advantages to hiring an accountant right now compared to, before COVID-19?
So I think this time last year, if you remember, we were really busy with jobs, which was great. The market was extremely busy. And I think the advantage of now is that the market is busy, but there's less companies hiring, and there's actually more Irish accountants who are in Ireland, and I'll explain that further. So just the nature, and it's a sort of rite of passage. Very often people qualify in their chartered accounting exams or their industry accounting exams, and they spend time in Sydney, Melbourne, sometimes Canada, the States, London, etc. So particularly in Australia, those contracts now, the roles, they're very often on a 6-month visa. So very often a lot of people are home at this stage. There's a higher availability of people, which I think is the main thing. I think the second thing is that the sectors that aren't hiring, so it's sort of well known that retail maybe is quieter, hospitality is certainly quieter. So there's quite a few companies that would have been employing, financial talent in those areas. And because they're not hiring at the moment, it just means, effectively there's less jobs, and there should be a higher availability of candidates. And I think that you might find coming into next year, the market could be quite a bit busier again. And you might find that there's a sort of a backlash of companies who may be held on hiring, and it could be a lot busier. And I think it's fair to say, although the last few months have been a lot busier, that we probably do notice that with some of the, obviously most people we place are sort of high demand, people who have options. But maybe a year ago, they might have had 3 or 4 options at that particular time, whereas it's a little bit more manageable at the moment. And that can make a process a little bit smoother for a company. So most companies who are hiring on a regular basis, they've come across things like counter offers where companies have been very keen to hold on to people and made them a stronger offer to stay, which obviously, it can be frustrating. Or, an individual might have 3 or 4 offers at the same time. Probably slightly less likely for that to happen at the moment. I think, although, that said, the last few weeks in particular have been a bit busier.
They have. What advice, I suppose, would you offer managers who are cautious maybe about onboarding, new employees remotely, or having someone start a new role who will be working from home, let's say for the foreseeable future, as a lot of companies have announced now that they will be working from home for well into 2021, I suppose.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And look, I mean, you could speak to 3 different people and you get 3 different responses to this, but we hosted some really good HR webinars over sort of recent weeks and months, and I think what really sort of struck a chord with me was to try and spend time chatting to people, the individuals, and really looking to understand basically what their own preference is, right? So, it's everyone's different on that front. So some people love having the interaction, the contact, the crack base that goes at work. Other people don't, and they're very happy actually. They prefer sort of being left alone to get on with it. So I think understanding that's very useful. So really the personality type piece is key. And then I guess you have to be able to make a decision on the productivity. If someone is going to elect to work from home, a high percentage of the time, matching that in line with the productivity piece is sort of key. But it's probably more outcome focused in that regard. I think you have to be able to understand about their home office setup. Do they have a suitable setup, basically, both in terms of, physically and mentally, for them, are they going to have the space? Do they have a proper sort of desk setup? Basically, is it a healthy environment for them to be in? Do they have the broadband set up as well? If you're going to be hosting Zoom type meetings or video meetings with clients, it's important, I think, that that the individuals do have a suitable home setup, and then it's really trying to maximize, or to find a suitable level of social interaction. Look, I think we probably experienced full ends of it. If you remember, we started out, there was sort of 2 or 3 conversations a day. We zoned it back a little bit. And I think, like a lot of companies, they're finding their way to a degree, but I think it's asking conversations maybe away from the day job as to how people are getting on, and what suits them best, and probably trusting the individual. And then just, I guess, on the sort of the learning style, as people are sort of onboarded, everyone's different. I think, like, I was chatting to someone earlier, and they were saying that the days maybe of, trying to finish work at 4:30 to get into town for a 6 o'clock lecture for 3 hours. I think that, what I would foresee in the future maybe is that some of that training and learning can be done online, and people can do it in their own time. And then it's really the group discussions is really where the most value is. Now, I do think, and we obviously ran some of our innovation sessions. I would always favor trying to do them in person as much as possible. And it's hard to replicate that stuff online. But then I think once you agree on the interaction and you agree on responsiveness, so, in the finance world, if it's a month end scenario and everyone's working the deadline, and in the office, it's usually, at the best of times, it can be quite stressful. I think it's just having agreed deadlines and asking people to say, look, can we agree on that this is going to be the sequence of events? And I have heard stories basically where, maybe some people haven't been as responsive, or it's been a test of communication skills. So I think it's maybe encouraging the individual to be proactive and probably over communicate to start off with. And then you find your comfort level from there. I think maybe where the frustration comes in is if someone goes AWOL and they're well behind, and maybe they haven't flagged, as to where they're at. So I think maybe understanding those sort of key inputs, and then having that sort of, transparent across the team, I think is key. But I mean, in answer to your, and this is a very long answer to your question, but I think companies are doing it very successfully at the moment. I think they've had to be able to adapt. And I think as a business community, we have been resilient on that front of being able to sort of make it happen. What's your own experience been? I mean, you've obviously been totally remote and then in the office a little bit. How are you finding yourself?
Yeah, I suppose, look, at the beginning, it was all about finding, I suppose, a balance, what worked best, how many times a week are we going to meet as a team. I think during that period as well, and still now, I think it's important to have the kind of ad hoc communication, with different team members, whether it's just a coffee and a catch up, over Zoom or Teams. But I think it's important to still have those kind of casual, interactions with the team and each other over the course of the week, because look, that's what everyone's used to, especially in an office environment. And I think, as small as they might be, they're important at the same time. I think definitely, it took a few weeks, but we got into the kind of swing of things and what worked well for the team, I suppose specifically with the amount of team calls we'd have during the week. But again, it's important to have the one-on-one catch-ups, like between ourselves, even, for people to catch up with their managers, making sure they're on track, making sure everyone's happy, and, that they've that there's agreed KPIs and objectives, I suppose, as well, which is important. But, I suppose just feedback from candidates that I've had that have started roles remotely, it's been overwhelmingly positive. They've been really happy with the experience, with how they've been trained in, with the level of communication. So, people have adapted, and, hiring managers and HR departments, it's going well for them. They have strong, obviously, processes in place.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Last question, Paul. How can hiring managers make sure they're reaching top talent in the market at the moment?
In terms of what's in their control, I think like what we often talk to companies about is that from our side of we're working together, that we're really clear on what their value proposition is to the audience. So I guess being clear as to what a direct hit for them is, that someone who if they're looking to hire at a particular level. So having that sort of clarity piece, and I think that's, as a starting point, is really useful. And then understanding what the value proposition is, both from a company perspective and what they can offer the individual. And I think that's a really useful piece. Now, we have a tool, as called our employee value proposition process, which can be downloaded from our website. In simple terms, basically, it's maybe working with your current team. And it's actually now is a very good time to do this and understand, what's if everyone was to sort of be on the same page, what are the 2 or 3 things that we can really promote around our team about working together? And I personally think that's more powerful than maybe what's listed on a company website, because very often the values and the about us section is listed, it could be a long time ago. So I think something that's really bespoke, I think, is really useful. Just some other things then. So we're finding video to be quite good. So as you know, we speak to some of our clients on video. We ask about the company, the role. It gets them talking. And it's, I guess these things are a two-way street. And, it gives an individual opportunity maybe to listen to the manager in action, talking about their team, talking about the business, what vision they have for the future. I think that's really, really useful. That again is, it communicates a lot more than maybe a job spec. I think the basics then about having maybe clean LinkedIn profiles, that's so if there's someone on the team who the individual is going to be meeting, it's probably the first place they're going to look. So just having it doesn't have to be super detailed, but I think having a nice, smart looking LinkedIn profile, I think does look good, and I think it's good sort of PR and branding, from employer perspective. As we know, it's very hard to beat having a nice job spec. A lot of times job specs are, and it's understandable. Very often someone resigns and the first thing dig at that job spec. That job spec could have been written 10 or 15 years ago. So, as you know, with some of the companies we worked with now, we work with recently, there's 1 or 2 new employers, and they've written beautiful job specs. I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to put that much time into it, but it's really thinking about, what will this individual gain from this? Absolutely, of course, you're going to be listing what the person needs to be a success in the role. But what will it give them? And I think that you'd be amazed at the difference, And if you go onto a jobs board now, a lot of it is, we want this person to do X, Y, and Z. This is what we want the person to have. It's not that exciting. Maybe the company profile is exciting, but the job spec isn't. So it's maybe being able to sell and say, well, the goal is that this person will take on more responsibility, and that will lead to greater job opportunities in the future, or more experience. And that, that'll scream out to the right people. And then I just think during the process, being able to explain the process, if it's a 4-week process, fair enough. If it's going to take time, then so be it. But just being able to sort of say, well, there's this initial telephone screening interview, then there's going to be a face-to-face interview, or an in-person interview, or whatever way it's going to play it after that. And just being able to guide the person through that, I think, is certainly useful. And managing expectations, definitely selling the opportunity face-to-face, and then we just think, that pragmatic piece about the first 6 months, if this person's going to come in and what are they going to need to do, and just be really honest about it, because it's and thankfully, we've had a very positive few years in terms of alignment, the right people in the right role, they're 2 months into the role, how's it going? We're getting on great. And I think it's because they've asked the right questions, and I think the company has been really clear as to what they're hoping for the person to do. And while you're always selling the long-term opportunity, it's not sort of overselling, saying there's going to be a piece of cake when they come in, or if your systems are a bit antiquated, then maybe say it. Say, listen, our systems aren't perfect, but we've got this and that. And I think being able to explain that. And anything else? I mean, so if you look at some of your clients, Sinead, from an interview perspective, any other things that you think they do really well, or that creates a better experience?
Yeah, you've touched on some of them there, but I think people definitely appreciate the transparency around, how long is this process going to take? They like to know, for the most part, people aren't just involved in one interview process. They're probably going to be involved in a couple. They like to know what the company is going to give to them, and whether that's promotion-wise, benefits, or it could be just extra responsibilities that they might take on over time. I think when it comes to job specs, what can be missing a lot of the time is about maybe some information about the current team that they have in place, extra responsibilities that they will take on over time, a bit more about the company, but a bit more than just what sometimes the company website itself will tell you, a bit more information in there about the culture. And you'd be amazed at how well, candidates respond to these things, and how quick they are to pick up on, the difference between that detailed job spec and someone who spent a little bit more time on it versus, a job spec with the bare minimum and just the responsibilities listed, because it is still a competitive market out there, and sometimes for some companies, they might be up against, the big multinationals, and they can't offer the same kind of packages and so on. But, they might have a fantastic culture in place, and, it's up to companies to sell that to employees at the same time. So, yeah, I suppose that's what I'd add there. Yeah.
I think a thorough interview as well. I mean, it sometimes happens that, the person goes through an interview and it's almost too easy. So I think having like a really good, strong, and I don't mean OTT, but I think at some point in the process, it's usually the first round interview where it's detailed, it's thorough, the person, that there's been a strong assessment of the person's skill set and the individual motivation. And look, I just think that works really well, and I know sometimes it can be, we look at someone's CV and we're sort of guessing or supposing, but I think having a really good structured interview in place is very beneficial for both parties.
Yeah. And look, I suppose an agreed format for interviews as well, I think sometimes people can skip from, maybe real kind of casual like conversations because they want to get to know the person, to, kind of strict competency based kind of questions then as well at the same time. But, I think maybe just having a difference between what the first round interview would look like versus maybe the second, and kind of going back from then and reviewing and seeing how the candidate got on. But look, thanks very much for your time and your insight into the accountancy, I suppose, kind of market at the moment. If anyone has any kind of comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. So please comment below as well.
Thanks, Sinead. Cheers.